So welcome everybody to the DeFi Summit 2021. On this panel, we are going to discuss everything decentralized identity, data, and privacy. And I am excited to have two amazing guests here that are really deep into the topics and are going to talk us through decentralization, privacy challenges in DeFi, and more. So yeah, maybe we can just kick it off with a quick round of introduction. Just to myself, I'm currently marketing manager at Bitcoin.com exchange, and we are an exchange providing traders with a secure and safe environment to trade their assets. And with me, I also have Ingo Ruebe, who is working at Kilt Protocol, and Hsin-Ju, who is founder and CEO of Dystopia Labs. And maybe you both can say something about yourselves. Maybe let's start with ladies first. Hsin-Ju, would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe tell us how you got into this space in the first place, and what you're doing.
So I've been in this space for 5 years. I was originally head of growth at Stellar, then head of growth at Solana, and then I was a director at Tezos. I started Dystopia Labs about 1.5 years ago, and we ran a bunch of virtual conferences. Now we're productizing. We're building a in real life CAPTCHA for like pseudonymous identity, and we're doing that through a turnkey NFT event ticketing system, because the best way to prove someone online is real is to meet them in person and check them in.
Interesting. Yeah, fascinating. And Ingo, I think you also know some things about decentralized identity or two.
Mike, okay, now I'm on. Yeah, definitely. So I'm in the space also for, I don't know, maybe since 2016, 2015, something like that. And we founded Kilt Protocol in early 2018 as a vehicle actually for making blockchains more accessible for industry. So I have an industry background, and we think, or we still think, that there's a huge need for decentralized identity and self-sovereign identity in many fields, not only in DeFi, but also in manufacturing, also in energy, also in KYC, and wherever you want. And this is the reason why we started building Kilt Protocol, and we are about to launch in the next months, I would say.
That sounds exciting. So we have something to look forward to then.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, okay. So maybe before we dive really deep into the topic of decentralized identity, during lockdowns, well, it was, I think, for a lot of companies very sudden that they had to move all of their data into the cloud to enable their workers to work remotely. And that has obviously been a great target for hackers. And we've seen a lot of attacks, which, led to data breaches and privacy breaches, with SolarWinds just being one of them. Maybe also more recently, I think it was yesterday that the Fastly content delivery network had a bit of a failure, and a lot of domains went offline for that reason. How do you think decentralization as a concept itself could help with such issues? Maybe Hsin-Ju, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so having worked at a lot of layer one networks and just like for a lot of different projects, like decentralization is really important, because not even just so that, because when things are centralized, it's basically a honeypot for hackers, and it's a honeypot for governments to basically steal data, because like people don't own their own thing, versus when it's secured by multiple people and like it's decentralized, it's actually much more secure. It's just a different way to think about it.
Thank you very much. Do you have anything to add, Ingo?
Yeah, I think it's actually a quite interesting thing that happened with the Web 2. So when the Web 2 started, like in the 90s of the last century, we didn't have the mechanisms to actually give the data into the hands of the users. And this is why all those cloud platforms emerged, basically. And I think that we see it as a huge problem for now about at least 10 years. And I think that most people actually agree that there has to be a change, not only because of the privacy breaches and data getting stolen, but also of the vast power accumulation you have with just a small, very small set of companies. And I think that governments and also industry would be very, very well advised to look into decentralized solutions, because they can enable an even or a level playing field for industry players as well. So so as an example, I come from the publishing industry, and like 10 years ago, we saw, well, the Facebook is getting big, and they're getting big by collecting data. And then we thought maybe we should also collect data. But this is absolutely futile, because we will never be as big as Facebook, and they will always be better than, and because the amount of the data really counts. If others have 1,000 times more data than you, they will do a better job with it. And it's actually not possible for a publishing company or so to enter the market and be part of the data economy, because the data economy seats are already taken, and there's no chance to get in there. And this is also from it's not only from the data breach, you're completely right what you say, but it's also from an economic perspective. It's actually a catastrophe what's going on there. And this is why many companies, I think we are hundreds now, started to build things like the Web3, which is a decentralized approach to web, which includes things like Polkadot, where we are part of the family, but which also includes things like Filecoin and IPFS, where we get the whole thing completely decentralized, or make it. It's just an offer. We're offering to the consumers, to the politicians, to the they eventually will pick it up. And I think it's not only better for the consumers, it's also better for the producers. But this is something that we will have to explain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now that you mentioned Facebook, also for a marketer, I think one of the realizations when companies started to grow their audiences on Facebook, at some point, Facebook turned off that they would show all your posts to your followers, and you had to buy them suddenly. So it's also, you're giving up a lot of power, definitely, with all these centralized platforms. Yeah, okay, moving on. You already mentioned Decentralized Id a lot, so maybe we should explain it a bit for our audience, and also for myself, because I haven't really used it before. So what's Decentralized Id? How does it look like? And what are some of the benefits for companies, governments, users when using such IDs?
Yeah, when you look, ID normally stands for identity. And so what we're talking about is digital identity. And digital identity is one of the cornerstones which went wrong on the web too. Because your digital identity doesn't live with you, it lives at the platforms. You have a login there, which is your identifier, and then you behave on the platforms, you do things, and then data about you is recorded. And this is something like your credentials, what you do, what you can do, which grade you have, whatever. And this data is 100% owned by those platforms. And this is a huge threat, actually. And when you look at the physical world, there you have also an identifier, and you add credentials to it. So your identifier is something that is you 100% personal, self-made. So it's like your fingerprint, like your face. This wasn't given to you by a company, it wasn't given to you by government, it's just there, it's yours, you created it. And then you start linking credentials to those things. If you look into your wallet, you will find certain credentials like a passport, driver's license, and stuff like that, which are issued by trusted entities. They can be government, but they're all linked to your face in a way, because they all have a picture. And if you sign something, then you decide if you sign it. And if you show your credentials, you decide if you show them, right? And in the digital world, as you don't own your credentials, as you don't own your ID, those things can be shown to some other service by some platform. Just log into WhatsApp, and you know what I mean. You just type in, log in with Facebook, and then WhatsApp talks to Facebook about you. And they share credentials with WhatsApp, which you don't even have access to. And that's quite a problem, right? And what we are doing with decentralized in decentralized identity is actually that we try to give the process that we have in the physical world into the digital world. So first thing is you have to create an identifier, right? So you can't have a face in the internet, but what you can do is you can make a public-private key pair. So building an account on your computer. So you do it yourself. You own it, right? You own the private key. Nobody else does. And you can advertise your public key and say, hey, this is me, by the way, and I can prove that this is me because I have the private key to it and I can sign things with it. And then you can collect credentials from other companies and governments, other people who are trustworthy. And then you can sign those credentials with your private key, with your identifier. And then others can be sure that they were issued by a trusted entity and shown to them by the real person they're talking to. And this is really, really powerful and needed in many, many ways. That was the short version.
Okay. So basically, when I want to use a decentralized ID, it's similar to creating a crypto wallet on my PC.
Very, very similar. That only gives you the identifier then. Of course, then it's just you, and that doesn't say a lot about you. That's not your identity. That's just an identifier. But then you can, when you add credentials to it, so then you have a DeFi platform, for example, telling you that you are rank 100 in the best knowledgeable DeFi persons. Then you have this credential, and then if you, I don't know, apply for a job or something, you can say, here, look at my credential, I sign it, and you can do this on the internet. This is what grows in identity. So identity grows with many, many credentials around one identifier. That's the two things.
Yes, so adding to that really awesome explanation, a very simple way of putting it is like, this is a way just to map keys across chains and platforms so that like people are able to have the same ID across multiple things. And the challenge with ID and Web3 is just like there's a lot of bots. And it's hard to tell what is human and what isn't. And like it's just the civil resistance part, which is what we're trying to figure out with tying it to in real life. But with digital identity, there's like aspects to privacy that like people need to worry about because Ethereum and most of these chains are public networks, which means all your financial transactions are public on chain, and people might not want to tie all that information to their identity because that just makes you vulnerable to attacks.
Yeah, that's definitely one point we will also address. Maybe just one more point on decentralized ID before we talk about exactly what you just mentioned, the privacy challenges in DeFi. How do you think decentralized ID fits into existing privacy frameworks? Because especially, when doing business, for example, with the European Union, companies always have to comply with GDPR. And I think decentralized ID might actually be quite a valuable way to ensure privacy. Yeah.
You want to go? Or, okay, then I say something. It is always said, or very often said, that GDPR and blockchain bite each other. I don't really think so, because they are actually concerned about the same thing. And if a decentralized ID actually is owned by the user, then GDPR is absolutely happy. GDPR is only unhappy about platforms having your personal information and then maybe not deleting it or misusing it in a way. So if you go in the direction that you really have a decentralized identifier, and then you shouldn't store this for example, if you have a driver's license, or if you're this 100 best person in DeFi, this is personal information, obviously. So you wouldn't want to store this on a blockchain, right? So because that's public information, it's publicly readable. You don't want that. But we don't do that. What we do is we take a hash of it and we store the hash on the blockchain just to make sure on the blockchain that this credential is valid. So we just store the validity of the credential on the blockchain, which is not personal information. And then the personal information is stored with the user, and the user decides who to share it with. And so that shouldn't be, that's actually working in the same direction. I'm not saying that GDPR is absolutely perfect. They have to change it, and they are on the way to change it, but it fits in there actually quite nicely. There's other things like privacy regulations where it doesn't fit. So I was just in a panel this morning with EU people, and we do have problems with something called eIDAS. I don't know if you know that, but that is a regulation that actually does not allow to have identity information without a central service. And this is a little bit crazy because this is exactly what the whole industry tries to avoid. And then we have this regulation saying, yeah, but you can do that, but you have to have a central service. So we have to get rid of those things. But GDPR is not the biggest problem, at least not for me.
Yeah, no, I think the general idea of the GDPR is also a pretty good one in terms of protecting people's privacy, and how that is sometimes executed is questionable. But yeah, I think Hsin-Ju, you also wanted to add something.
No, I think you guys covered it perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Then maybe we can jump onto the privacy challenges that still exist in DeFi. And I think a good illustration of, even though Bitcoin has been around for more than 10 years now, people still often, when I talk to them the first time and tell them what I do, they come with the idea that Bitcoin is anonymous and just used by criminals. And I think, first of all, we've come a long way from that, but also the FBI tracing the wallet back to the DarkSide hacker group and seizing some of the funds that they had gotten through ransom might show people that actually Bitcoin isn't as anonymous as they think. And neither is DeFi. And as Hsin-Ju already mentioned, yeah, all the transactions are on a public ledger, can be traced. And if people always use the same wallet address, for example, it's fairly easy sometimes to make out who the person behind might be. But maybe, Hsin-Ju, what challenges do you see apart from that in DeFi in general? And maybe do you have any private experience as well?
So as mentioned, like, because all these networks are public chains, everything is traceable. So there are like services like CipherTrace and Chainalysis that like trace people's transactions, and they sell that data to governments, to enterprises, and to whatever. Regardless of whether that's a good or bad business model, the problem is like right now, most people that use DeFi are retail. If we actually wanted to expand the crypto space and actually get more real world adoption, like there would need to be privacy in order for enterprises to consider it, because they have like privacy like things that they have to comply with, or else like they're not serving their customers compliantly. So it's just one of those things where it's like right now it's very experimental. Like privacy is needed in the real world, and this is the only way to bring more people into the space. And in terms of personal stuff, not really.
Yeah, I think what I've heard from some friends, for example, is that they try to bid in and buy things on a decentralized exchange, and we're front run because all your transactions are obviously visible. But maybe, Ingo, you have also some other challenges you see or things you would like to add?
No, I think you covered it nicely. Thank you.
Okay, well, great. Maybe then I can throw the next question to you, which would be, what kind of products or services would you like to see, or are you already seeing in the DeFi space that are addressing this need? And personally, for me, recently I've covered a lot of privacy currencies also for our communications, and I think it's quite exciting what they're trying to do, but it's all still very early on. And also it's not really user-friendly, some of those coins. So what do you think? What kind of services or products would you like to see in this space? And or are you already seeing, or maybe building yourself?
No, please go.
No, go ahead.
So, well, looking at DeFi, it looks sometimes to me that this is a pretty early stage thing. And in some ways, it is moving a little bit into where the banking is currently, which is interesting. So it tries to be completely different, but in some ways, it becomes a bit similar, especially with the lending platforms and all those things. And when you look at that, I think the biggest problem right now, probably for the space, is the collaterals. The collaterals are quite high, and that really takes the fun out of things. And that is also related to privacy, because if you don't know who you're dealing with, of course, the collateral has to be quite high. So I think there will be also a stream somewhere that you will want, or that some players will want to actually expose themselves as good actors and reliable partners and stuff like that for receiving lower collaterals so that they can act better. So and I think this is what I'm not sure if I want to see that, but but I think what we will see is in the next years that some kind of automated rating agencies pop up, and this is going to be really, really exciting, because this divides somehow the field in the people who actually want to stay anonymous and play in the old DeFi space, and then there will be possibilities, I think, that you can also have a history, and you will want to have this history because it is recorded on the blockchain and it can be absolutely 100% trusted. And if you then put algorithms on top of that and people expose who they are and link maybe their decentralized identifier with certain accounts and can also prove that those certain accounts actually belong to them for this and this time, then that could be a quite interesting thing which might come up.
So for me, what I find really interesting is the idea of customizable privacy, which is the user is able to select how private they want their transactions to be. So whether they want it to be completely private or whether they want it to be audible or something that is transparent. And that's like very important because like regulation is not going in a really good direction for privacy projects right now. So a lot of privacy projects are launching, like how they frame their launch and like their projects is they have a viewing key. And with the viewing key, they would, because like for projects, like how the government views projects is like, is there a centralized party that they can potentially throw in jail if someone does something illegal? And for privacy projects, there's like high risk that illegal activity will happen on the network, which is why privacy projects like try to decentralize very, very fast and very early. So the risk is around the viewing key. Will they give a viewing key to the government? Because then privacy projects just become honeypots for people to get caught, whether they're good or bad actors. But depending on how the project is designed, like viewing keys may not be needed for like just giving to like governments, to regulators, to whatever. Because like if they're set up in such a way where like it's the users that are the ones deciding, instead of like this is just natively private completely, like that gives them more flexibility. And also there's like liquidity challenges with like pure private projects, because like exchanges won't list them because like they're banked and they're worried about like regulation and different things, versus projects that are not banked. It's a little different. So it's just one of those spaces that's like evolving very fast, and there's a lot of different things that people are working on. And yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, from an exchange's point of view, I can say that privacy coins are challenging to list. The legal counsel usually doesn't really find it too exciting, but users often want those coins. So yeah, it's kind of trying to find a balance as well.
So I am curious about one thing, if you don't mind me asking you a question about exchanges. So I know like for projects like Zcash, for example, they have transparent transactions and also shielded. So with transparent stuff, like why do exchanges have a problem listing it? Because in theory, all those transactions are traceable.
Yeah, if it's those that actually have transparent ones, but I think Monero, and we also listed one called Pirate Chain, for example, and they are privacy by default.
I love
that's one of those where also our developers have most of the challenges with, I would say. yeah, because it's just a not very used technology. I mean, Ethereum, that everybody knows ERC20 tokens by now, at least from the developers in the DeFi space. But when suddenly somebody comes with a, yeah, everything is zero knowledge proof, then
Yeah.
it becomes a bit more difficult to implement with our existing tech. But yeah, definitely. Always a bit of a fight. And I think also that leads maybe to the next question. Do you think DeFi and regulation can coexist? Because it's often seen as a threat by some, but others see it more as an opportunity.
I think it can coexist, but I do think DeFi would need to evolve a bit. So like DeFi projects try to pass on the risk by decentralizing, but it's very hard to launch and decentralize fast enough, because at some point, like in the early stages, like you need to bootstrap, and to bootstrap you need a centralized team. So it's like how fast a project can like alleviate risk. So that's like one thing. Another thing is like projects, lots of DeFi projects are actually looking into like getting licenses. They're looking into like whitelisted addresses because like they want to get enterprise clients. And a lot of them actually have like permission pools of like whitelisted clients. And like they just construct things a little differently when they're trying to deal with enterprise. But it's like not fully DeFi in that sense. It's just like, it depends on like what the goal is of the project. And I think it definitely can work with regulations. It's just like people need to understand what the regulations are first, because that is constantly changing. And it's also teaching regulators and like government people just like how things work. Because like a lot of it, there isn't a centralized team once they have decentralized. It's just smart contracts. And who do you hold responsible for something like that?
Yeah, maybe Ingo, do you have anything to add as well?
No, actually, I have nothing to add, but I completely second that that there will be a coexistence, because it is necessary that there's a coexistence, and both have to learn from each other. Basically, I'm pretty sure that regulators are a little bit behind, but that regulators will also, because this field is growing immensely, right? And regulators will be behind that. Because there's also lots of possibilities, obviously, to make profit without paying taxes, which is not in the interest of the regulators normally, or of the government. So they will have to have a closer look in the future, and this is why those two things will somehow converge. And I think also the banking industry, it's still there somehow. I think some of them, the fast movers, will also start to. We did a project with a bank last year, and and if you have fast-moving people inside a bank, and then you have the support from the CEO, then it is also possible actually to move the banks a little bit in this direction, and then they see new opportunities, which maybe the people from the DeFi space haven't seen yet. So and they are pretty good with the regulators, so they will maybe also push something forward, which could be in vice versa, then nice for the ecosystem. So I think that we're going to see exciting collaborations in the next 5 years, probably, but a lot of things have to change, not only on the regulator side, but also on the DeFi side, obviously.
Yeah, I also totally agree with that. And well, we're heading towards our end of the panel, and I would like to finish with, do you have any tips or tools you're using yourself to keep more private online, or when transacting maybe in the DeFi ecosystem?
For me, I just have multiple addresses, and I try not to mix the addresses. So like setting my addresses up so that like one address is used for only this use case, and this address is only used for that. This way you can keep like your taxes clean in terms of like if you're doing one for a company and one is personal or whatever. And it just makes things easier. So that way you know like what every address is tied to.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip. And I think a lot of people just by default use always the same wallet address. Like they just have one MetaMask account and that's it. even though it's really easy to create a new one. So I can definitely, second this. Ingo, how about yourself?
Well, I'm not so much around in the DeFi space. I'm not doing a lot of things, and I said, well, I come from more from the engineering side, so this question is not really relevant for me.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. But maybe when interacting online, do you use maybe certain browsers, or do you try to avoid Google?
Let's use Brave. It's a great browser.
Yeah, definitely it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's certain things that privacy settings is something that you should basically look at. But I'm not totally against using Google. So well, it's if you can do things. So if you have really private things that you don't want anybody to look at, then don't put it into the Google Cloud. I think we all know that, but. Well, my browser history is pretty boring, and it's completely fine for me if Mr. Google looks at it. So, I think you have to do a case-by-case consideration. So is it really practical to use those services, or is it dangerous, right? So probably you shouldn't do if you have a MetaMask and you do all your things with a MetaMask, maybe it's not the best idea to have this on a Chrome browser. On the other hand, well, it's, if you just read your newspaper, I think then it's totally fine to use the Chrome browser. So, so yeah, it's well, if you're not so much into DeFi, you don't really look at that so much, probably.
Yeah, and I think also privacy always comes as a cost for user. And I think one of the reasons people use all these login with Facebook or login with Gmail is because it's just so convenient. So that's definitely.
This is what we have to. This when we do Web3, this is the biggest challenge actually. What we have to do is we have to deliver something which is as practical as those services. If we don't, then we lose. So because, as I said in the beginning, it's just an offer, right? And if the offer is worse than the actual, no one will take the offer. And this is the big challenge that we have.
Yeah, but I think DeFi is one of the fastest moving spaces I've ever worked in. So I'm pretty positive that we're going to see something like a decentralized ID that's user-friendly and usable for people pretty soon. And yeah, any last words for this panel? No? Okay. Then I think I would like to close it, and thank you both very much for joining us here. And also, yeah, thanks for the DeFi Summit for organizing this event.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much.